he said that part of this book had been written under the influence of LSD. And I was like, that's impossible. Up to this point, I was like, LSD, it makes you crazy.
Right.
That changed everything for me. I realized I'd been brainwashed in a certain way and came to believe only, the fear-based side of things.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Good Trip podcast. My name is Brent Pella. I will be your host on this wonderful journey. I'm a comedian, content creator, actor, director, writer, and all types of other things that I could keep saying to boost my own ego, but instead, I will just say that I am so excited to bring this project into your life, and I am so grateful to you for receiving it and being down to rock with me. This podcast has been months in the making and features a series of conversations with business leaders, folks who work in medicine and the creative and entertainment space, each with their own personal experiences and points of view towards psychedelics as medicine, as therapy, and as a tool for growth. I myself have been on my own evolution with plant medicines and psychedelic medicines with that intention of using psychedelics as a medicine for the past few years. And I am so excited to continue to grow and continue to learn. And that was really the motivation behind doing this limited series podcast, was to have conversations with people I greatly admire and look up to and wanted to learn from and felt like they have something that maybe you could learn from too. Throughout the course of the next few weeks, I'll be dropping one episode per week on my YouTube channel, as well as Spotify and iTunes. And the guests I have lined up are incredible. I am so excited, especially for the first guest of the series, Rick Doblin. If you don't know Rick Doblin, get to know Rick Doblin. If you know Rick Doblin, congratulations. You are on the right side of history. Rick Doblin is the founder and executive director of MAPS, M-A-P-S. That's the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, where he has been advancing psychedelic medicines and therapy practices for decades. This is his life's work, and it is getting so much more momentum in today's day and age than maybe it used to. He is excited. I am excited. Everybody that works at MAPS is excited. And everybody that knows about the benefits and the freeing power that psychedelics can have on your mind, your spirit, and your soul is ecstatic at the advancements and the progress that Rick Doblin has been leading in that field, including, as of this recording, the involvement in stage 3 trials with the FDA to get MDMA therapy cleared for use on folks with PTSD and other issues. I met up with Rick at an event down in San Diego for VETS, V-E-T-S, another fun acronym, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, founded by Rick. Not founded by Rick. Rick is who I'm talking to. Founded by Amber and Marcus Capone. A lot of names going through my mind right now. And Amber and Marcus Capone are also guests on this podcast who will be featured a little later on. But this episode with Rick was awesome. We got to record right when Rick got to town down in San Diego. It was 10 p.m. He said he would have around an hour of time, and we ended up rocking for over 2 hours together. It was quite a journey, and he's got just what seems to be an infinite well of knowledge and expertise and stories and research and facts and figures and anecdotes and just such a rich body of knowledge resides in this man's brain regarding this topic that I'm sure we could have gone for 30 hours and still just have only begun to scratch the surface of what he does and the importance of the work that MAPS does and how it's truly benefiting the world. So I was very grateful for Rick Doblin's time, and I hope you all can get something out of this conversation the way I did. But first, a super quick word from our sponsor, Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy. Now, this is a product that was created by Dr. Kirk Parsley, a former Navy SEAL, who's actually on an episode of the Good Trip podcast coming out soon. And during that show, we talked a bit about his experience working with fellow veterans to get them off of prescription pills and off of sleeping pills that are so damaging to your body. And it really inspired him to create Sleep Remedy, which is a blend of different ingredients like magnesium, 5-HTP, L-tryptophan, and melatonin, all of which are meant to combine and mimic your body's natural progression into sleep. So if you have trouble sleeping at night, falling asleep, relaxing into sleep, or if you wake up feeling not fully energized and refreshed from a good night's sleep, I highly recommend checking out docparsley.com/Brent to get a discount on Doc Parsley's sleep remedy, which comes as either tea that you can have before bed or capsules if you're not into drinking liquids before bed. And I highly recommend it. I had a great night's sleep last night. You can tell because of how much I'm smiling right now. Do you see the smile? That's a good smile, baby. That's a good sleep smile. And that came from Doc Parsley's sleep remedy, which I have had such a good time integrating into my overall wellness routine. So again, docparsley.com/Brent for a discount. The Good Trip podcast also brought to you by Odyssey. Odyssey is a sparkling caffeinated beverage that I absolutely love. It comes in 4 flavors. It's got 85 milligrams of caffeine from green tea, and it's got 2,500 milligrams of mushrooms. Not magic mushrooms, but don't let that deter you, because these mushrooms are meant to sharpen your focus, your creative edge, and your ability to get through your day and accomplish all your tasks with clean, smooth energy, no jitters, no anxiety, none of that. You can trust me because I have at least one of these every day. Odyssey is a sparkling mushroom elixir that you can find on Amazon and online at odysseyelixir.com and in various stores across the country, Albertsons, CVS's, and a couple others. You can go to odysseyelixir.com. There's a store locator, and you can also order online from their website. Highly, highly recommend you check out Odyssey Elixir. It is delicious. So, without further ado, please enjoy this uninterrupted trip with Rick Doblin. I like to think, we're talking about the Grateful Dead, dude. I like to think my first experience with psychedelics was when I was 2 years old at the Grateful Dead because I was at a Grateful Dead show. And if there's a music that's going to be psychedelic, it would be the Grateful Dead.
You know, we took our son, Eden, before he was 1 year old in the last tour of Jerry Garcia and the rest of the Dead. So he also saw them from when he was just a few months old.
He got blessed.
He did.
He got Jerry blessed.
We sat way in the back so it wouldn't be too loud.
That's awesome. So you said we were outside. You said you just spoke at Walter Reed.
Yes.
That's huge.
It felt like a big breakthrough. Yeah.
Yeah. So did they invite you? How did that come about?
Yes, they did. There's military psychiatrist Bob Kaufman, who's expert in PTSD and has also been learning about psilocybin and ketamine, and is part of a research site in Rockville, Maryland. That's just amazing, and they're doing 5 or 6 different studies. So Bob's been very focused on this new federal task force to look at how to regulate psychedelics, and he's also been very involved in trying to bring us into not just the Veterans Administration, but the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And so he arranged for this talk. And he's also been through our training program and will be a therapist working with other veterans.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And what...
there's a classic picture that I somehow didn't notice that there was this American flag behind me on the stage, but in front is this podium that does say Walter Reed, military. And for me, I was a draft resistor during Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a conscientious objector because you have to be against all wars, and I'm not a pacifist. So that left me no choice. I couldn't be.
So you were the reason Nixon created the war on drugs.
Well, I learned from others. He started. It was handed down to me, and it was actually the Grateful Dead, in a sense, more Ken Kesey that really started me off on psychedelics.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what was some of the first inspiration you remember having?
Well, I was studying the other. I was taking Russian in high school. This is through the late 60s and 70 and 71. And a friend of mine gave me a book to read, and I loved it. I gave it back to him. I thought it was amazing. And he said that part of this book had been written under the influence of LSD. And I was like, that's impossible. Up to this point, I was like, LSD, it makes you crazy, chromosome damage.
There's no way you can write a book on it.
Nothing good, nothing, profound.
Right.
Yeah, and so my friend said, check it out. And it turned out it was Ken Kesey, One Floor of the Cuckoo's Nest. And he had written part of it under the influence of LSD. And that changed everything for me. I realized I'd been brainwashed in a certain way and came to believe only, the fear-based side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How old were you then?
At that point, I was 17.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay,
so
still young, not even.
Yeah, but you could say I was deluded for a long time.
Sure.
I was shy. I don't drink. My parents don't drink, really. I don't drink alcohol, so I didn't really smoke pot in high school, hardly. One time even, just once.
Yeah, I didn't smoke till I was 18. Yeah, so same.
What was your original?
My original reason was that my mom scared me. She terrified me. She just said weed. She just said, don't do it. It's terrible. Like, you'll be in trouble. I guess please don't do it. Da 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 da.
Wait, this is the same.
The same.
That took you to the Dead show.
I think weed. Her child smoking weed. I think that's where she got to be overprotective because she let me do pretty much anything else. I would party. I would go out.
Did she have a problem with it?
Did
she get
I don't think she had a problem
dependent on
with
it, or
not that I know of, but I do know she smoked a lot. And then I think maybe she got really career. I'm sure this conversation will motivate a new conversation, Mom, which is great. We're opening up all the doors here, Rick.
This is coming out to your family is the first step.
It's wild, Mom.
It's the most,
we need to talk, okay?
Yeah, there's a T-shirt, by the way. There's a group, Students for a Sensible Drug Policy.
Oh, that's
which
way
is
better
on
than
these
Dare.
colleges all over the place. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh,
but
wow.
they're a T-shirt. That is one of my favorite T-shirts. It says, have you spoken to your parents yet about drugs?
That's so funny.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What's
it's
the
like
Students
for a Sensible Drug Policy.
Students for a Sensible Drug Policy.
They're all over the world, actually.
That's incredible.
On
have
campuses.
you spoken to your parents about drugs?
Yeah, this idea of coming out. We need to educate people who
in
have
high
been
school,
miseducated.
I played basketball. I was a sports guy. So that was another part of it. I never saw any of my favorite athletes smoke. And my mom said it would mess up your lungs. And that was really the essence of why I didn't smoke. It wasn't the fear of getting in trouble or getting grounded. It was this theory that it was me equating smoking weed to smoking cigarettes. And then in mainstream, what we're being taught in school, that your brain is a fried egg after one hit of weed, and so that got kind of buried deep inside me until my early 20s, really.
Well, this idea that you inhale something, it's like cigarette smoke, which gives you lung cancer, and why should it be any different for smoking pot or cannabis? But it is different. And it's different because the cannabinoids, a lot of them have anti-tumor properties. And it's also not other additives and things that are in tobacco. But it's pretty clear now from even NIDA-funded, National Institute on Drug Abuse funded researchers, and even on the NIDA website that used to scare people about marijuana and lung cancer now says there's no evidence that it does cause lung cancer.
Wow.
And it's something where Dr. Donald Tashkin at UCLA has done decades and decades of research. He was originally for the prohibition of marijuana, but he did the work on the lung function and ended up realizing that both in large-scale population studies, comparative, people who smoke and people who don't smoke, through Kaiser and through just really big population, and through direct evidence. So, yeah, if she scared you about lung cancer.
Now we got to talk, Mom. No, she said she would do mushrooms with me soon, so she's flipped. Yeah.
Have you moved through the MDMA space yet?
Not yet. I think we need to overcome our mushroom mountain together. I will lead her down the path gracefully, and then we will potentially approach others. But
wow, how is it that you're thinking mushrooms are the next step?
My own personal experience motivates me to try and spread the word and spread at least my experience. I'm still fairly new comparatively. I mean, I am still evolving with trying different plants as medicines, microdosing. I'm on a microdose protocol right now.
For synthetics or
No, it's
it's all plants.
Yeah. It's psilocybin with I think there's other mushroom compounds mixed in, reishi, lion's mane, those types of things. Yeah. But yeah, I think
LSD ever?
LSD, I am a fan.
Okay, so I'm just trying to talk about the synthetic, natural kind of.
Yeah.
But, okay, so LSD.
But LSD, I'm a fan. Yeah, so I'll dip into that side of things. Sure.
Hey, Mom, it doesn't hurt his brain.
It doesn't hurt my brain. It doesn't. Look at how good I'm doing. I'm doing great. I'm speaking full sentences. I might not write a book.
There's this Oprah, this woman who supposedly had holes in her brain from taking MDMA 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Incredible brain scan holes. Very scary, but the woman was there talking and laughing and walking and joking, and she looked totally fine, but she had this, wounded imagery, which was graphically manipulated and completely fake.
Isn't it? I mean, that was also apart from your brain bubbling like an egg, your brain developing like tunnel systems in it, like holes, just sinkholes were going to pop up. That was another thing that we were just taught and we were told over and over again.
One of my worst trips ever, though, was this idea that my fiber optic cables, just incredible. The brain is like this massive fiber optic cables, and that I was like having some emotional difficulties, and I was resisting, and I was like making a kink in this fiber optic cables, and these cables weren't quite matching up. Just an incredible mismatch, and
That's insane.
That was scary.
What's the message? What's the deeper message?
The message was, I think that I was blocking the flow. My fears were blocking the flow, and that if I somehow could have let go more into it, and that I didn't permanently damage I didn't permanently make kinks, but I think it was a good metaphor for what was happening. Another time earlier in my tripping was that I got confused. I felt so resistance again that I somehow thought that I was like a light bulb heating up my brain so much that I was like burning it out, and that there was just then this I had this nasal drip in the back, and I thought it was like for a moment like my brain melting. That I was just like that I was so good at resisting, and it was just like,
what drug were you on for these?
That was LSD. That was a large dose of LSD.
Yeah,
and it just couldn't. I couldn't go further. I was, what would have been great is if I would have had like half a dose of MDMA.
In addition,
that would have been great, and also ideally, a therapist or somebody. This was my friends and I were trying it on our own, and at party and stuff. We didn't have much of this knowledge of how it could be used.
Yeah. Do you find a difference when people say drugs versus medicine? Does that ever come up? Like,
oh yeah, we have to be really careful of the kind of framing for people.
Yeah.
That's why for the brand name of MDMA that we have to come up with, we're going to try to stay away from things like ecstasy.
Yeah. Ecstasy. What else? Just joy. We call this one
empathy.
Absolute pleasure. This is the absolute pleasure pill.
I can share a name that was we really like, but was rejected. InPath. InPath.
Wow.
This kind of, it's about what the drug does, what the experience, what the medicine does. I don't have such a negative connotation with drugs, but I think also people know drugstore that it's more like legal or illegal,
right? More
than drugs or medicine, I think.
Right. Now you said a brand name for MDMA.
Yeah.
Are we we're going to brand MDMA so that it doesn't have to be just letters. It can be something that speaks more to the purpose and the use of it.
So that it can be a prescription pharmaceutical product.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And so.
And MDMA doesn't work just because it's like does it actually need like a brand name to it?
Yes, when you, it's hard to trademark or copyright MDMA.
Yeah, because
You
it's
know,
just
so and you need to
what it is.
distinguish what is your product from, so you can't sometimes call something just water.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Aquafina. It's much better.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's and 5 times the price.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's wild. So are there any other front runners? How are you guys going to decide on a brand name?
Well, it's amazing how difficult it is because there is a whole computer programs that are set up to look for phonetic similarities with existing approved medications. And if I think it's 72% or something like that, more similar, then they knock it out.
Wow.
Yeah. And then if it's similar to other things that have already been trademarked or patented or trademarked or copyright. So it's very difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're still struggling to find the name. And the reason that we're struggling is because we just got the last data point in our second phase 3 study last week, meaning that we'll know in a month or two if it was successful, which there's a good chance it was, very good chance. Then we prepare an application to the FDA.
Mm-hmm. So you need that name.
Yeah.
Rick, you've been going for 30 years. You can't get hung up for another 30 on a name.
Well, on the other hand, I don't want to choose the name too soon either.
Okay.
Because this is like a mantra. It's like there's something, if we can get the magic one.
Sure.
One of my favorites, there's a drug modafinil, if you know this, is for jet lag or shift work, but it's also approved for narcolepsy. So it's basically a non-amphetamine alert drug that has, in many places, been adopted, sometimes even for pilots. And it's called Provigil.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of Provigil. Yeah.
Okay, that's the kind of name.
Oh, that's a cool name. Provigil.
Oh,
wow.
Yes, it's
that's so good.
It's just like so.
That's so good.
And it's exactly, and it's.
I never even thought of that. Or Claritin.
Some of these are just
another one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's a good. Yes, it's like a mantra. It's like so we just you can have some that sound too pharmaceutical. It's hard to find one. Yeah. Provigil is the model.
Provigil is
that
great.
kind of thing that says what it does.
Yeah.
Okay,
if I think of any good ones, I'll let you know.
Yes.
Or maybe I'll look them up first to save you the step.
Well, you need all these special computers. And
that's
programs.
Crazy. That's wild. I can't be doing all that.
Yeah, so we're hoping. This is now saying that we know for sure that it'll be approved, but that we have to plan for all options.
Yeah. Call in the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
Now you said you were 17 when you read that book, and that was your kind of moment of turning a 180 and coming to a realization. What was your first step toward actually acting on some of those realizations you were having?
Well, the first was that I was realizing that the psyche, that there were all sorts of problems and challenges and threats, but that a lot of them came down to a mindset of separateness, or how we identified ourselves in the different tribal ways or so. But if we could have this more collective sense, a deeper sense, that would give us, I think, more connection and compassion. So that was the kind of thing I'd been thinking about. It's like I took a class in Jung in high school, and Jungian psychology, and was reading a lot, but it wasn't really until college So my first thought was to go to this experimental college where I would be free to go in all these different directions. Where what they said about New College, and it's the Honors College of the state of Florida now, but in that the student's curiosity is the most important thing. And that they didn't want to put anything, like we were talking about UC Santa Cruz, that they didn't want to put anything in the way of that. So there was no distribution requirements. That was one of the big things, is that you could just, take whatever you wanted. You didn't have to major in anything. You could just have a general studies.
Oh, that sounds great.
If you wanted to major, then there was no grades. And so it was a free space. I knew I wanted to go there, and it's that in that free space I did not really anticipate, but I should have kind of known that there was a strong psychedelic culture.
It's so funny. They probably looked at you like, "Wait, you didn't come here?" Because
I was like, "Where I have landed in paradise."
That's so cool.
It was a nudist colony at the pool. So
in the college?
In Florida. It was outdoors. It was outdoors, Florida, nudist colony. I was just super shy guy in high school.
The nudist colony was a
pool,
part of
the
students?
School? Well, no, we didn't have to wear clothes at the pool. And a lot of people didn't.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a big Olympic. No, I didn't.
Oh, good.
No,
that's great.
I'm proud to say that when I finally found my way to having a girlfriend, she was a nude lifeguard, and I would be like drowning. And help.
That's insane. That's so fun.
The campus police said that their job was to protect us from the real police.
That's wild.
Yeah,
that's really
I felt
cool.
like such a bubble. We talk about bubbles. This was the
it doesn't even
bubble
sound like
par
America.
excellence.
I mean, that sounds like.
I think it was a very rare moment in time, and
how
just
long
an
does a
incredible
place like
bubble.
that last?
Well, now
there's no way
it's
it's anything
funded
close to that.
primarily by the state of Florida. It's the Honors College of the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So the state of Florida is pretty conservative these days. So there's a little bit of pressure not to have like the all-night parties.
Sure. No more nudity by the pool.
No more nudity by the pool. A lot of things have disappeared.
Do you know around like when things started disappearing?
Oh yeah. I was the first person arrested for swimming naked in the pool.
No way.
Yeah. A friend of mine, Ed Blay, and I, we were swimming laps. Two guys just swimming laps naked around midnight. We hopped over the fence.
Uh-huh.
And the police came, and they had just merged with the state, and it was like, okay, state rules and stuff.
Your time is done. Yeah.
And we're just like swimming laps naked under the stars. Phenomenal, you know. And what was interesting is that we got arrested, and they wanted to make a big point of it. So they called in the real police. The campus police called in the real police.
The ones who were supposed to be protecting you from them.
Yes, they and then and there's students that work at the on work study things, work answering the phones and things at the cop shop, we called it.
Mm-hmm.
So we always had a good idea what they were doing, But it was a friend of mine, so he had to call the police, the real police, to take us away. And then as soon as his shift was over, he came and bailed us out. Steve Bell. It was fantastic.
Steve.
Yeah, thank you for that.
That's funny, man. So were some of your first... that's so crazy that a college like that existed. I mean, what did you major in? Like,
I majored
blunt rolling.
Well, I dropped out in the summer of my first year. Not in the summer, in the second semester, really, of the first year. I dropped out for 10 years.
You dropped out for 10 years.
Yeah,
and then you went back
to the same place.
Had it changed by the time you got back?
It had merged with the state, and
but then it was even deeper. Yeah,
but it was still a lot of the same flavor, and I had. Spent those 10 years preparing to do direct work with psychedelics. This was more, I had decided, I dropped out because I wanted to focus my life on psychedelics, but I was psychologically not prepared for that. Mm-hmm. I was just 18 years old.
Yeah, so you wanted to focus, you knew by that time that you wanted to focus on psychedelics, and you also recognized that college environment wasn't going to be the best spot for you to just be free to pursue them however you want.
Well, I did realize it was the best spot for me to be free if I just didn't have to be in school.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If I could just hang out
just
with my
be naked.
friends.
Yeah. That's all. Okay.
I kind of managed
Yeah.
to realize to get back. I dropped out just for 10 years, but after a year, I went back. You were, I was involved also in sports in high school, within handball.
Handball.
Yeah, our high school had handball courts.
Wow. Our high school didn't have handball.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
This was, and most high schools
Is
didn't.
that one-on-one? That's a one-on-one sport?
Yeah, you can do doubles too,
Yeah.
or it's one-on-one mostly. Yeah, but also doubles, and it was in the boys' locker room too.
The handball court
The
was?
handball courts, two of them. Yeah.
Wow.
We had like 3,800 people in our high school, so it was really big.
Yeah, it was twice
And
the size, wow.
I didn't feel comfortable being in a team sports. I felt wary of groups, and I called it the tyranny of the coach. I wanted my freedom, and so handball was great because it was only intramural, and because other schools didn't have it, but it had the people that were the best athletes in the off season would play because it was such a good workout, and because it was ambidextrous. You had to kind of use
Right.
both sides of your hand, and so I got to really be very good. I got finally my senior year. I got to be the best in the school.
Did girls like handball players?
I
The way they like
was
football
too
and-
shy to even talk to a girl to find out.
Were any handball
I
players
couldn't-
like charismatic? I mean, you are, but like,
some of
I'm
us.
trying to think of handball players walking around like a football jock. Sounds a little different.
It is a more one-on-one, smaller, not a big stadium watching.
Would people
but,
show
but
up to
there
watch
were,
the games
There are some.
or the matches?
Yeah. I mean, but
'Cause
just
it's a fun
it's in the
sport.
boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once I dropped out of school and I realized that I needed to be grounded, and the school just had this big swimming pool, but it didn't have a lot of athletic facilities. So I asked my parents if I could, if they would buy all the materials for a handball court, and I would build it, and we would donate it to the school, and they would support me, and I would go back, and I'd be at school with my friends, but I wouldn't be in study. I would have no responsibilities, but I would be building this handball court as a present, and it would be a way for me to get kind of grounded.
Yeah.
And my parents were like, sounds good, get him on college campus, step in the right direction. So I did that, and I spent about a year building this kind of perfect plane. It's because
Wow.
you don't want the ball to bounce in a wrong way, and I just was extremely precise, meditative, almost kind of.
Yeah.
And I had a tremendous time building this.
Did you do it all
handball print.
yourself?
I tried to. Some things I needed help with. There was a partial roof, so I needed help carrying up the joist. But
And were you starting to experiment more with psychedelics around that time?
This
Since
was
you
where
all
I
the time
had
away?
experimented a lot, and
Yeah.
this was where I was experimenting. A fair amount. Like I spent my 21st birthday by myself doing LSD, and that was an incredible experience.
How much LSD do you think you did on your 21st birthday?
Well, around 250 micrograms.
Mhm.
I mean, that was kind of the standard dose.
Yeah.
You would have periods of hours. So it's the opposite of microdosing.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not the opposite. You could do 500 to 600 micrograms, 1,000 micrograms. I mean, at some point, it doesn't matter. You've sort of disabled the parts of your brain you're going to disable, and
Right, you can't
empowered
go
the
any
parts.
further
And
at
it's
some point, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. Once you hit a certain spot, it's just that. Now you're wasting it. Yeah. Yeah. The that 10-year period, I mean, that sounds like that was your free run. That was your what did you do for those 10 years?
Well, this idea that building things was getting me healthier and more grounded from the handball court led me to start trying to think about building houses. My parents had a house built by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's that I had grown up in, this incredible house. And so I was going to inherit a certain amount of money that would be just enough to build a house. Or so I thought. I actually, went over budget. Didn't finish the house for a long time. I lived in it unfinished. But it was a very interesting house, and we still have it. My wife and I haven't rented out. It's kind of a house to trip in.
Oh, cool.
But a family house.
Is it decorated,
it's a family house.
kind of psychedelic?
It's more cedar.
Oh,
with
okay.
stained
So
glass
it's
and earthy granite
yeah.
walls and kind of angles in the walls and stories and like the master bedroom has got the structure of it is big beams, and then the decking on top of it can be angled in different ways, so it forms an infinity.
Oh,
and in
whoa.
the middle of it is a big skylight. So
Whoa.
I had in the master bedroom there's like.
Did you say your wife rents it out?
Well, my wife and I own it, and we rent it out.
And where is it?
In Sarasota, Florida.
Okay, I'm going to get the info from you after this.
It's pretty, There was actually just an article. There's a magazine called Dwell about houses, and they did a feature on the house.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're building stuff.
Yeah.
And where's the connection between that and the psychedelic journey that you were going?
Well, I was building my capacity to handle emotions, to handle psychedelics, to handle society. So it felt that there was that I knew I would go back to school at some point once I could figure out how to do it with actually the psychedelics first. So I would be tripping now and then, sometimes with smaller doses, sometimes with larger doses, but I would be trying to just balance myself out. I felt that way overdeveloped in my mind intellectually, way underdeveloped emotionally and spiritually, way off balance, and the world was that way and I was that way. And so it was a process of, even though my house, as I said, I didn't finish it because I wasn't so good at budgeting. Some people wanted me to build for them, and I had my girlfriend who was great, who sadly is no longer alive, but she grew up Southern Catholic girl, like this Northern liberal Jewish guy, and her father in particular wasn't so thrilled with me, but he taught a class to contractors about how to pass the contractor's exam. And I thought, okay, I just built this handball court. I think maybe I'd like to build a house. I'll see this. I'll sort of run this money through me and see what it means. What is this? What can I do with it? I'll build this house. I'll live in it for a year or so. It'll be a house, a family house, but also a house to trip in. I'll try to think more like that. And so the idea we hatched that I could ask him, or she could ask her father to let me take this class for free, and that he would agree, because we knew he would think I would fail, and then he would show that I wasn't worthy of his daughter, and I would get the class for free, and I would show that I would pass, and that I would
and that you were
worthy.
a real man. Yeah,
I was a real man,
yeah.
and I managed to get the lowest possible score you could get and still pass.
But he had to pass you.
I did.
What was his reaction to that?
I think he was, it slowed him down a bit.
Sure,
It was good. And so then I had a license, and then I was a contractor. I was the youngest and dumbest contractor in Florida.
That's crazy. How old are you at this time? Your early 20s?
At this time, I'm 20, because there was one county, Manatee County, that so wanted development that they didn't have a residency requirement. They didn't have an age requirement. You didn't have to have prior work experience.
Yeah.
You could just apply to take the test. And so I'm like, oh, and then other counties give you reciprocity. So that then you, because it's,
so
once
did
you pass the test.
That contracting work give you the freedom to continue to do your own research on the side? Was it like a 50-50 split of your time?
I would say it was more doing the building, and my research was more just trying to figure out the world, get balanced, think about. I read lots and lots and lots of books about psychedelics and psychotherapy, and I would sometimes sit for friends or something and but I was through this time just gathering strength. And then finally I built a house for one of the professors at New College. And I thought, maybe now I think I can go back to school and put psychedelics as, my major would be transpersonal psychology and psychedelic therapy and research.
Wow.
Yeah, and so my very first semester that I finally went back after 10 years, I was so lucky. There was a workshop at Esalen in Big Sur by Stan and Christina Groff, who I'd been with for a workshop 10 years before, but this is where I was like, I had to get more ready. So it took me this whole decade of building houses. And so then I'm finally back in school. I'm with him, with Stan and Christina, and designing this curriculum for, and thinking about what will I do for the next 4 years. And there was also a fellow, Ed Barker, who had been in charge of a PhD program at Harvard in psychology and social change. And he had been a psychotherapist as well and politician. He was in charge of training for the Peace Corps. He'd retired in Sarasota, and he was permitted to teach at New College. So every semester he was like my therapist and my teacher for a class.
Wow.
And he was super paid for separately by my parents. And he was just very interested in psychedelics and psychotherapy. And
oh, that's so cool.
So
was that rare to find people that were also interested around that time?
It was, yeah.
Did you try to like start gravitating toward a team to get some support at least?
Yeah, and there was still a strong culture, and we had particularly at Esalen, and so I had been able to finally get back in 1982 into this academic with psychedelics first. I was like merged in the system, and within a couple weeks is when I heard about this new drug called Atom, which was Atom, and it was made you feel love, feel connection, feel self-acceptance, be more open, better listener. And that it had also unfortunately escaped from these therapeutic circles where it had been used for about 500,000 doses in the prior 7 years or something, and it had become ecstasy, and it was being used as a party setting, so that it was going to be criminalized sometime eventually. Yeah, this underground quiet thing. So I started school at the exact moment within weeks that I learned about MDMA, and I thought I learned about LSD after the backlash. Now I'm learning about MDMA before the backlash.
Right before, yeah. So
now
getting those years early, yeah. What year was MAPS? That was
MAPS was 86.
86, yeah. So around 82 was the Atom, which is MDMA.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And then MDMA ended up being the first push that MAPS did.
Well, yes. So in 84, I was back to Esalen, working with Stan Groff and Christina on breath work, and also they had a month-long workshop on the Spiritual Emergence Network. And a lot of times people will have crises, and it's something's not fitting in their life, but it can be a crisis of growth. It can end up with good, or it can be pathologized and in different ways when people have these so it's the spiritual emergence if you support it right. And I'd studied that, and after I was back at school for only 4 or 5 days, I was asked by a friend whose girlfriend had taken MDMA and had trauma come up and was just in a terrible place, and had been in and out of an institution after the MDMA experience. The MDMA experience had made her worse. She'd been in turmoil before. It'd been kind of a brutal situation, and but she found a new balance under MDMA, not in a therapeutic setting. It came to the surface and checked herself into a hospital to not kill herself. It was so powerful.
Wow.
Got out of the hospital, and after 5 or 6 days, and was even more interested in killing herself because they didn't help her and gave her the same kind of medications, didn't do anything good before. And so anyway, I spoke to her, and we agreed that she wouldn't kill herself while we would work together, if we would work together. And I had just come from this training, and even though I didn't feel qualified, I said I don't know what else to do, or I doesn't know what other options. So anyway, it helped her get over her PTSD.
Wow.
So that was 1984.
And what, because that sounds like such a traumatic thing that she was going through.
It was terrible.
So what, saying that it helped her get through her PTSD, what was like that path? What did that look like? Was it multiple sessions over the course of a year, or was it kind of continued sessions?
It was 2 sessions over about 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. The first one was MDMA, and then the second one was an LSD MDMA combination. And it helped in a way to bring the core fears. Like the person had said that if she ever told the story, he would kill her. And this was like a long way away and years before, but it still was kind of freeing to be able to talk about it.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. So that was 1984.
Yeah. And then in 1984, shortly after, and that was in the house that I had described that I'd built for tripping. That's where the first experience was. That was in the bedroom with the infinity and the skylight up above.
That sounds healing. Yeah, it does. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And so that's later that summer, though, the DEA moved to criminalize MDMA. And that's where a group of people had prepared for this for years. And this was the nonprofit I'd started before MAPS, Earth Metabolic Design Lab. Connected with Buckminster Fuller. A friend of mine, John Lambie, had it, but he hadn't really been using it for a while, this nonprofit structure. And it was about alternative energy. And I was like, okay, psychedelics are alternative energy.
Yeah.
We can see that. Yeah, it's the broader view of the mission. So I took over this, Elise Hagar and Debbie Harlow and I, and organized the support and, sponsored a lawsuit against the DEA.
Awesome.
Which we were winning, and it freaked out the DEA.
Yeah.
And so they also started trying to criminalize MDMA internationally. And then also, we were winning in the course of public opinion. We'd given MDMA to rabbis and monks and professors at Harvard Medical School, and
that's awesome. How do you get it to a rabbi and a monk?
Well,
I guess the rabbis
the
are
monk
over here,
is in a monastery.
Yeah,
you have to meet them somewhere.
Yeah. How do you even introduce MDMA to a monk?
Well, this was through Stan Groff, through Esalen, and through this workshop. Brother David Steindl-Ras was at a monastery not far from Esalen, and he came to talk to this workshop for a couple of days as one of the guest professors, teachers, and he was from a monastery nearby.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I would come back more and more for meetings, planning meetings about how to defend MDMA, and also workshops.
Were you met with any resistance from groups like that who already held such high spiritual beliefs and had such like high spiritual backgrounds? When I think of a monk, I think of,
oh, okay. So, no. So, I actually at one point got called before the Father Bruno, who was in charge of this entire monastery, because there were several monks that were doing MDMA, and he basically was like wondering, what are my monks doing with your drugs?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was able to explain why in a convincing manner that he was fine. That these were tools to enhance meditation. These are tools to enhance therapy. They're not used all the time. They're tools to get a deeper insight, a deeper experience, a deeper knowledge of what's possible. And then you can have a direction, and you can move in that direction without the drug. This is true both for meditation and also for therapy. And the idea here is to help people be capable of processing emotions and information in ways similar to when they're on MDMA, that it's something that you take back. It helps you with issues in the past, but it also helps build your capacity to deal with ongoing or new traumas, to take them in and to, not dissociate, or to the extent you can not do that. And so it's about changing your baseline without drugs.
Yeah.
So that and also by this point, when I had to defend myself with Father Bruto, I had made a connection with the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations.
Wow.
His name was Robert Mueller, and in '83 he wrote this book that I read, and it was called New Genesis: Shaping a Global Spirituality. And he was like the mystic at the UN. Mm-hmm. And he had been there. He'd been a French resistance fighter in World War II. He'd been at the UN for like almost 40 years. He helped start the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica. And so the book was this theory of change that I'd had when I was 18. This idea that this sense of connection, that if you are identifying deeper than your tribe in ways, that we'll still have all these conflicts, but that you can see the commonality. You'll be less willing to dehumanize and to prejudice and racism and all of this, or fundamentalism, that all these things. So the book had a picture of the Earth from space, which is his sort of concept. And he said that the United Nations is for conflicts between countries, but a lot of those conflicts are religious-based. And if we can just have this more global sense, we don't need to be killing each other for these religious differences, because if you move away from there's one right religion, and there's that there's this cosmic story that we're all involved in, and that the religions are like languages to express the same kind of how we're connected or what we do with each other. And there's different ways, and certain religions prohibit this or that, and certain seem more restrictive than others, and things. But they come from the same place, that we should be able to kind of collaborate. So that's what this book was saying. And so I wrote him a letter, and I said, I agree with your book, but you don't mention psychedelics. And psychedelics are a tool to help us have this experience, or something similar. You could say it's not even genuine, but it's similar enough that we can learn from it. And I talked to him about the Good Friday experiment and the scientific study of psychedelics and spirituality, and I mentioned MDMA being legal and this therapeutic potential, and he wrote me back. He wrote me back, and he gave me a list of monks and rabbis and other religious people. Yeah. And it was kind of like they'd be interested in hearing from you. I kind of heard, they'd be interested in trying this MDMA. And so I sent it to people. I met the most incredible people. They would report back to him. And so when I had to go to Father Bruno, I was like, well, okay, so the Assistant Secretary General. And not only that, but the Good Friday experiment, which was the key experiment that Timothy Leary did with Walter Pankey.
This isn't the Concord...
The Concord prison experiment was around the same time. Okay. So the Good Friday experiment is in 1962. Okay. And Timothy Leary is the faculty sponsor. Walter Pankey is doing the project. He's a minister and a doctor, and he's getting a PhD. And the study was at Boston University Chapel is where it took place. It was like a Good Friday service, 20 people, 10 attendees, experts in religion and philosophy of religion. But the minister who let them do that is Reverend Howard Thurman, who's this incredible African-American minister, super, like, what an orator. But more importantly, he'd studied with Gandhi. Whoa. And he was Martin Luther King's mentor at Boston University, where Martin Luther King got a PhD. And so he helped Howard Thurman. It helped introduce nonviolence into the U.S. civil rights movement. Wow. And had a strong interest in the political implications of the spiritual experience. And then he was willing to let the Good Friday experiment take place in the basement chapel while he was doing a regular Good Friday service for everybody else.
Wow. So describe the Good Friday experiment for people who don't know.
So people have probably heard about a band called The Doors, based on a book by Aldous Huxley, Doors of Perception, based on a mescaline experience that he had, published in the late 50s. And so there was a lot of interest now. Also, Life magazine, like the top magazine, just like the when there weren't so many outlets. So, they really introduced into American culture the discovery of psychedelic mushrooms. And so there was just this in the air, this idea of these psychedelics that are kind of newly discovered, and LSD is being used more and more, and people are having a range of experiences. This idea that something seems like mystical, spiritual. People have talked about it for thousands of years, some parts of the experience, particularly the classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, and that it would be worth studying whether they really could facilitate a mystical experience. So Walter Pahnke, first off, had to devise a questionnaire. What is a mystical experience? How do you measure it? What's more of it? What's less of it? Mm-hmm. And the mystical experience questionnaire that's used today in the LSD, psilocybin research at Hopkins, at NYU, and that MAPS uses in our MDMA research, is only a very slightly modified version of what Walter Pahnke developed for the Good Friday experiment. He spent a year trying to come up with his different categories of unity, a sense of the sacred, a sense of the transcendence of time and space, a deeply felt positive mood, a sense of ineffability that is beyond words. You can't really put it into words, that it's something deeper than that, and this sense of timelessness and incredible. So this experiment took religiously inclined people from the Andover Newton Theological School in a religious setting, Good Friday, and gave them either psilocybin or a placebo, nicotinic acid, which they didn't know, which gives you a flush. Mm-hmm. So everybody had something happen.
Right. Body temperature goes up slightly or something like that.
Yeah. And if you take enough, you could get a red flush and
sure.
Tingle. Yeah. So what they discovered, or what they found, was that 9 out of the 20 people had a mystical experience, full or significantly in that direction, 9 out of the 20, and 8 out of those 9 had the psilocybin.
Wow.
And they discovered that people reported long-term benefits after a bunch of months.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, Walter Pahnke died. He became one of the top LSD researchers. He worked at Hopkins with Stan Grof and did incredible work. But he died mysteriously in a scuba diving accident in 1971, and his body was never found. And it was a big tragedy for
the whole community.
Yeah, he was like one. Yeah.
I wonder what happened mysteriously.
Well, it's the way like he just like melted into the ocean of being.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it was a cool mystery then. Maybe. Maybe it wasn't foul play. Maybe
No, it wasn't foul play. Yeah. No. It's just something.
You say somebody mysteriously disappeared in the ocean.
Didn't mean to. No, I shouldn't have said it like that.
No. Maybe that's just me watching too many horror movies lately.
Yeah. But
that's really cool.
What that meant was in the 80s when I finally went back to school and I had to do a senior thesis, and all psychedelic research was blocked, and you couldn't give drugs to anybody, couldn't get permission. I thought, well, there is something I can do, which is a long-term follow-up study to the Good Friday experiment. And Walter Pahnke, who did it, would have done it if he was still alive, but he wasn't, and nobody else thought to do it. So I thought, okay, I can do a 25-year follow-up study, and that's the most important thing in any case from this mystical experience is it durable? Does it last? What do people think over time? Do they have other mystical experiences? So the theory is called by the fruits shall ye know it. So what is the long term? What is the fruits of the experience? Which you get. So it was really, I was building on a phenomenal classic study of psychedelics and finding a way, an easy way, just by asking questions of where they're all at now. That wasn't that easy, but the hardest part was finding them.
The 8 people?
The 20 people.
The 20.
I had to get
the full
all
20.
I had to get all the 20. The placebo people, I wanted to see the psilocybin. This was all psilocybin.
Okay.
Or placebo. Yeah. So it just was, I thought, okay, I know, Walter Pankey was dead. Timothy Leary didn't have the records. Nobody knew who these people were. All we knew is that they were from this particular school, Andover Newton Theological Seminary, during 1962.
Oof.
That's the only thing we knew.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, I'll go there. It wasn't that far from. Well, I would go there in person. I was living in Florida, but I came up here, and I thought I'll go to their alumni office and just say, can I put something in the alumni newsletter, and ask if anybody was in the study. All right, so this is now 1986. This is still like height of the drug war with Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
And the alumni office says, no, we will not let you put this ad in. I'm like, this is the most important study ever done on the psychedelics and mystical experience, and your students were part of it. And this is a seminary school.
Yeah.
You should want to know about this. You should be proud of this.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we just don't want to do anything. We want to have nothing to do with it.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is at a dead end. There's nothing. I'm done. So I thought, I'll at least go in the library and I'll see if they've got anything about the thesis and any commentary about it. Maybe I'll learn something that way. So I go to the library. They don't have a speck of information about it. Nothing. This was a Harvard PhD classic. They have nothing about it. Not the original thesis, even with their students, nothing about it. And I'm just like wandering around this library a bit, and I notice they have collections of the alumni and the yearbooks and stuff. And then I noticed that they had a book that had everybody who was in school in 1962 and their addresses.
No way. Oh, because back then you did that.
There was no like cell phone.
Right.
There was
You just put all there was no email.
No email.
You had an address.
That was it.
That was it.
That was totally it.
And you found that in the library?
I found it in the
so
library.
Did you end up digging up the 20 people or as many as you could?
It took me about 4 years of doing it. But I found 19 out of I identified 19 out of the 20.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was pretty.
And I would
travel all over the country to see them, to interview them in person, and just talk to them.
What were the lasting findings of the follow-up study?
Well, the questionnaire. Well, just this is this mystical experience questionnaire that was given at the experiment to describe their experience. I gave them the same questionnaires, and the results were almost identical. It was way more. They scored very low, the control group on mystical experience. And the psilocybin group scored quite high.
Yeah.
And their scores were almost identical, even after all this time. So what that means is they had time to reflect on it, and they still considered it to be what they did at the beginning. Many of them had spiritual experiences without psychedelics, mystical experiences without psychedelics. That made them convinced that the psychedelic experience was as genuine as the others. But they often preferred the non-drug mystical experience because it was more uniformly like positive or stable, whereas with the psychedelics, it kind of was deep, but it was like waves.
Yeah,
and go different. You'd be traveling in different places. And they also remembered parts of it. That was incredible. So this was 25 years before. If I asked you about the movies you saw 25 years ago.
Nope.
Maybe
some blurry, flashy streak of color.
Yeah.
I
mean, I just actually resaw Harold and Maude.
Oh, cool.
That movie last night. I'd seen it like a long time ago. I didn't hardly remember any of it. It was, but there's.
But they remembered.
They remembered. Pretty vivid parts of it. Yeah, that just, and the placebo people didn't. And the placebo people divided sort of into two groups. One was people that they were so intrigued by what was happening by what they could see their friends were going through, by what they heard about afterwards in this, intervening time shortly after, that they decided that they wanted to take psychedelics as soon as they could.
Wow.
Yeah. The other half were so appalled by what they saw that they decided they never wanted to take psychedelics. There was one situation that I discovered that was, I think, a big surprise and a big disappointment, and a little bit of a key to the flaws of why some of the 60s self-destructed. Because this was a classic experiment, and the way it was portrayed is that the people had the psilocybin had the mystical experience, but and it got exaggerated to everybody that had the psilocybin had a mystical experience. But there was one person that was so taken by the minister, by Howard Thurman, and the audio is on our website actually, of the Good Friday experiment, the
cool.
actual sermon. But you have to tell people the man on the cross. You have to tell, and this guy decided that he would do that he should do that he should leave this chapel, he should go outside, he should tell people there's a man on the cross, and he actually bolted out the door while he's high on psilocybin.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I think it was Walter Pankey, Houston Smith. They went out to try to chase him. It's a big traffic Commonwealth Ave right in front of the church. And they finally get him, and they luckily he's not hurt, but he doesn't want to go back in
because of the man on the cross.
He's just like, it's nice outside. He's in the basement of the gym.
Right.
So they give him a shot of Thorazine as a tranquilizer.
Whoa.
To calm him down, to take him off the trip, to bring him in, and they never mentioned that at all. Like in the study, it's never mentioned.
Wow.
They just took it for we've learned also that when you have a difficult psychedelic experience, therapeutically, the worst thing you could do is tranquilize somebody. It reinforces it, it freezes it in place, it gives the message they can't handle it. Much better for them to just sit through it, or to while the drug will eventually, or
psychotherapy,
have support while through it, but just to try to deal with it. even if you're stuck, like I've described some of my early experiences being stuck, just to wait it out.
Yeah, I mean, isn't
tranquilize.
Sometimes I hear people talk about having a bad trip, but even a bad trip, I mean, is still potentially part of the reason that you're on that is maybe to work through something. Work through the difficulty.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. So we say that difficult is not the same as bad. And I think bad is resistance. Difficult that's you're dealing with it. The world can be difficult. Your emotions can be difficult. The reality is difficult. We're here about Veterans Day. The world is difficult, and people need support sometimes.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And that must have been that follow-up experiment that you did. Was that one of your highlights around that time?
Well, it was fantastic. This was the first research I ever did, and I did this as an undergraduate. And I think
so that had to have been so exciting, right?
Oh, it was fantastic, because what I was also learning is that you can create new facts. That you can you can change the discussion completely.
Yeah, it's not even filling out a blank page; it's creating a page and then writing on the page.
Yeah. You've added to the.
You're adding to the book.
You shifted the balance.
Sure.
And that you can create this new thing. Because what I did discover too, in addition to this omission, so it was in a way that they minimized the risks, a little bit exaggerated the benefits, and a little bit minimized the risks. And they maybe took this for granted that sometimes you give people Thorazine, but in any experiment, you have to report things that go wrong.
Right.
Things that you didn't. But what I did discover, and this again validated this theory of change. Now, this is after I've met the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, and after a lot of this work, this was I was able to hear from multiple of the people that were in the Good Friday experiment that they did have this kind of sense of unity and connection, and that did motivate them more, gave them a certain impetus to do more work. They were already ministers in school, but that it strengthened their commitment to social justice causes and to a certain kind of activism, and that they had seen death in a different way. I mean, part of this unit of experience is to see the natural cycles of life and death, and that's goes on and not to be feared. It's just intrinsic, and but also use the precious time that we do have. So they sort of had that sense of the rarity of the moment and this mystical sense of how we really are connected. So that this thing that Howard Thurman had wanted, that I think that it can be. Now, I've just, by the way, spent some time just a few days ago with somebody, running on the Republican ticket and telling me, though, that he'd had some great MDMA experiences. Mm-hmm. So it's not like everybody, but there's kind of like a general tendency, I think, that is to be a bit more open, more emotional. He seemed pretty open-minded, actually.
He's got to be if he did MDMA.
In a lot of ways. Yeah, so I think he didn't think of himself as
a lot of people
close-minded person.
Yeah, a lot of people just write. I mean, they'll write these drugs off just because of what they remember being told when they were 10.
Yeah.
But so if that was one of the most exciting parts of that time, what's the mirror image of that today? Like recent memory,
is these phase 3 studies. I mean, that's it. I mean, last week finished the second phase 3 study. The data analysis take a couple months. If all is as we anticipate, we're hoping to have FDA approval in early 2020. So I'd say that early 2024.
2024.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it will be at that point 38 years
so
since I started
that's
MAPS.
Wild. Now, what do you? I mean, back then, if you were told, "Hey, this is where you're going to be in a stage 3 trial," would you have thought, "Great, that should be about 10 years, 12 years"? Like, is this 38-year period a lot to you after all this time?
Well, they say that sunk costs, you don't dwell on sunk costs, meaning that, it took all that time.
Yeah.
I had a 5-year plan for probably about 15 years. I had a 10-year plan for about 20 years. Yeah. One of the most embarrassing things is to go through old MAPS bulletins where I'll make predictions.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
budgets and predictions and stuff, and we're right around the corner.
That's
and
hilarious.
Stuff. But as we get closer and closer, we really are more able to have more information on our projections.
Yeah.
I think we're in really good shape, and I think also that there's a growing preparation for the possibility that we do have FDA approval and what that means, and what it mostly means. And I haven't really emphasized this yet in what we've been talked about, is that it's not the MDMA, it's the therapy. The therapy is the healing part. The MDMA is used within that context, but it's not, here's the drug. So the key part is training the therapists and how we do that. And we hope to have like 25,000 therapists or so in this decade. There's 12 million PTSD patients in America, so it's enormous.
Right, and it's a different type of therapy than just having a therapist, a typical therapist in there with somebody experiencing the drug. Yeah,
it's 42 hours of therapy. It's, at least the way we've done it, it's a 2-person team of therapists. So it's male, female usually. But there's 3 8-hour day-long sessions. So it's not like your 45-minute or 50-minute hour. So there's 12 90-minute sessions and 3 8-hour sessions. And these 8-hour sessions are the experimental sessions. Start at 10 in the morning till 6 at night. And it's a deep dive into sort of the core issues that people have. You could say it's the MDMA is almost like an anesthetic. If you're going to have your body operated on, you get this anesthetic. Sometimes you're it doesn't hurt. You're not aware of it being hurting. Sometimes it is nitrous or laughing gas for people. So MDMA is almost like an anesthetic for emotional pain, and you're still dealing with it, but it's not the pain that you kind of react against. It's the pain you can kind of experience, and so that again is what shifts it from bad to difficult.
Right.
And from that process, people revisit the trauma and have memory greater than before. So they're able to really remember more of the trauma because they're not even parts that were deeply buried and they're able to think about it in this cognitive processing way. And there's a way it's prolonged exposure because you're dwelling with this. And then there's what's called the memory reconsolidation. You sort of, as you restore this, you've had this experience and you've acknowledged it, you're able to put it into the past. So it moves from foreground to background, and it's part of your story. People then can move on. And I think that's it's not that it never happened. It's not that it isn't something that's sad in different ways, but it's something that has become a piece of a larger tapestry that people can. There's even a measure sometimes we use called post-traumatic growth inventory. So under certain circumstances, if you survive these traumas, it helps you realize how precious every moment is, or how simple kindness is so important, and not to be forgotten about, or it helps you think, what do you most want to do with your limited time? So there's ways of growing from it, but it's a way where I think people can incorporate very challenging material or emotions that people have been stuck, or open up to deeper emotions and love that you didn't know you were capable of.
Yeah.
It's great for couples therapy.
Yeah.
We need to do research more of that with that. It's a challenge in the sense that FDA, we cannot medicalize things for personal growth in a way. They have to be for diseases.
Yeah. So why? I mean, why not? Why?
Well, the way our system of laws is. So we have certain drugs that are, highly illegal drugs, and then we have certain things that are medicines. Then we also have certain things that are religious sacraments, like ayahuasca can be used in the certain churches in the United States, or peyote can be used by the Native American church. But the medicines, there's no, for things that are like herbal medicines that are not scheduled drugs, that's that middle ground. You can, but for drugs that are highly criminalized, there's only the medicines, and then it's a crime or it's a religion. And synthetics, it's hard to. The only things that have been made into religion so far are peyote and ayahuasca.
Naturals, yeah.
Naturals that have religious, indigenous history behind them. Mm-hmm. Not just starting at the Grateful Dead or starting with Ken Kesey or in that kind of a cultural thing. But that can qualify for many people. That is a community. It's spiritual for. So it is. But getting DEA approval for that is a different thing.
Yeah.
And
what's the biggest challenge as far as like a government body, or is it the pharmaceutical companies campaigning against psychedelics? Like what? I know there's so many.
Yeah, I don't see the pharmaceutical companies. I think they don't understand psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. So this isn't like we're moving into. Well, in some ways, we're moving into their territory because there's billions and billions of dollars of antidepressants and stuff. So a lot of those are generic now. They haven't been recently invented. So there's less profit from a lot of those, but still enormous. But I think even the Drug Enforcement Administration is not opposed to, here's a great story, not opposed to medicalization. I mean, there were a bunch of things. We had to sue them, as I said. I also sued them again on marijuana, and they blocked domestic marijuana production.
Mm-hmm.
So the DEA was successful in blocking cannabis for 50 years.
And now it's an essential business.
Well, now
During a
the DEA has issued other licenses.
Mm-hmm.
I think the zeal for the drug war has diminished. A lot of people realize how ineffective and counterproductive, and what are all these people dying of opiates overdoses if the drug war is working? It's just it's not. So I think we're in a much different climate. So there's a book being written about MDMA, and the author wanted to know, for writing this book, Rachel Noor, if she could contact some of the early DEA people that were involved in criminalizing MDMA, and could I connect her with some of those? And I was like, well, I can see why you'd want to do it. It's interesting. Gene Hayslip was the guy from diversion control at DEA headquarters that was leading the charge to make MDMA criminalized, and he's no longer alive. But his deputy, Frank Sapienza, went to the different hearings that this is in '85. I also went to, and he was quoted in Newsweek as saying that the DEA was taken totally by surprise when I walked into the DEA headquarters to demand a hearing during this 30-day public comment period, that they knew about ecstasy, but they didn't know that this whole therapeutic community was there. That we had been organized, and that we had this DEA law firm working pro bono for us, that we had these experts from Harvard Medical School, that we had this whole body of research, and that we were just showed up out of nowhere. And so that's what he said. So I thought, okay, maybe he's alive. so I went and did a search on and found him on LinkedIn. And not only is he still alive, but he consults for pharma companies to reschedule drugs.
To reschedule drugs.
Yeah, when they're, when you've got to make a drug into medicine. Yeah, he's got his special expertise. So I thought, great. So I sent him an email. I said, we haven't spoken in 35 years.
Yeah.
But I kind of enjoyed, I knew you weren't trying to crush therapeutic use. And here's this quote where you said that. And now, I said, now we're on the verge of making this back into a medicine. We weren't joking. It really is a medicine. We're doing all this great work, and we help first responders and police officers and veterans and all this. And I said, would you be open to helping us to consult with us when we negotiate with the DEA on what schedule it should be in? We've got this team that we're building. And also this woman would like to interview you for her book. And the very next day he writes me back. And he said, yeah, I remember. I'd be glad to help. I'll talk to the reporter.
That's so cool.
I'll connect with your team. So we've got somebody who is involved with criminalizing MDMA.
And now
is now helping us. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I wonder if he's ever taken it.
I don't think so at all.
Probably not.
I don't think so at all.
But I mean, if somebody like that can come around, do you think has it just been?
We've got a senior DEA official.
Yeah.
Now his son went to Iraq and got PTSD, and found cannabis to be helpful. Mm-hmm. And then the father was like, well, how maybe cannabis is helpful sometimes and stuff. And so, now he's been 6 or 7 or more years consulting with us. He's moved from just on marijuana with psychedelics. And I think there's a lot.
Have a lot of the roadblocks in your journey been because people are so stuck in their old ways and they're just resistant? Because it seems like after a certain point, I mean, your first decade, the amount of research and evidence you had, and then your second decade, the more research and evidence came in. Like, what kept?
Well, I'll say it took a decade and a half before we could start getting evidence of benefits. Mm-hmm. Before that, had to be evidence of that it wasn't as risky as people were saying.
Okay.
Because there was all these negative brain
so you really needed
damage
time to set the foundation for
unfortunately, but we knew from our own experience and working with people that it was fine, it was safe, it was therapeutic. We didn't, but convincing the official world that was resistant in a lot of ways took a very long time.
Yeah.
And but what I learned is that every step of the way, it's you have to kind of celebrate small victories, but also you have to separate out. At least for me in this kind of work, it was. I needed to be able to be happy at the end of the day, even if nothing had succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
and I needed to sustain that for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And so I learned about, if I'm creative, I'll try my best, and I can be happy at the end of the day. Yeah, so to see now that it's coming around and actually working is amazing. But now are the challenges of how do we bring it forth in a way that is in a capitalist society and pharmaceutical medicines.
Yeah.
Can we go the whole way with philanthropy? Well, we need to take investors. How do we get the resources that we need? Is a big question.
Yeah. Do you see different drugs like psilocybin or MDMA moving from the therapeutic space into a more commercialized space, the way that weed has? Do you think that?
Yes, I do. I think it can and it should.
Mm-hmm.
I think it'll take about 10 years of after medicalization for there to be full legal access.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
regulated, probably, like the way weed dispensaries currently are.
Yeah, although what just passed in Colorado, or the Oregon Psilocybin Initiative, the natural plant medicines that passed in Colorado, it's about systems of supervised sessions and also more opportunities for people to have experiences. It's not the same as exact legal access, but it's pretty much that in a supervised way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I think that there's a two-pronged strategy. What's the real goal? We talk about MDMA, trauma. The goal is that humanity as a whole, I guess I've been talking about this all along this whole discussion, but humanity as a whole is like lemmings going over a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what it would seem. If you've got somebody from outer space, looking in, and you see the glaciers melting, and, you just think, God, I hope they make it.
Yeah.
And so we can make it. We're brilliant. We can solve all these problems. We just need to solve the emotional problems, stop killing each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it starts maybe with some monks doing MDMA.
Yeah.
And floating and getting even higher.
That's the simple recipe for success.
There are quite a few religions that could use a dose of MDMA.
Oh my God.
If they're drinking the blood of Jesus.
The women too,
Right. They're eating the body of Christ. I think a little hit of MDMA and you get the teardrops of Jesus.
And in the early Christianity, it does seem like that the wine was spiked and it was hallucinogenic,
right.
And that's how
Jesus
and
the
his
tree of
friends
life a mushroom?
built you could argue that in different ways, and so I think this is so we need two strategies. One is medicalization, one is legalization, and they need to run in parallel.
Do you ever think about how if certain medicines were legalized, it might impact the stewardship that those medicines have had over the years, such as psilocybin or ayahuasca? Like the capitalization of those might not be. Do you ever think that the capitalization of substances like that might dilute what their original intention was?
No. I think that you may get diluted forms of it, but that the people who want to do it in the original ways will still be able to do that. Mm-hmm. So it won't dilute it for. And I think it'll make more and more people want to get it in its full version, because
rather
they'll
than
see
watered down.
Yeah, but I think that there will be different ways. And I think one of the big things that we're talking about right now is the influence of insurance companies on minimizing therapy. I mean, you do need the
Oh,
drug, but how
yeah.
much therapy do you need around the drug? We think a lot, and we think you get great results, and we want the insurance companies to pay for it. And we say that it'll save them money in the long run, because PTSD, in particular depression, these have a lot of corresponding health problems that you get living in a high-stressed or depressed state, or just, suicidality emergency room. So that we think that we should be able to persuade insurance companies to cover our full 42-hour treatment.
Yeah.
But the pressure will be to make it as, skinny as you
Cost
can get
effective
it.
as possible dude.
Yeah.
Getting an insurance company
Yeah.
seems harder than getting the government to
Yeah.
agree with something. That seems like a monumental
Well,
task.
and it's different, in fact, in most countries of the world where it's national health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So what you need to show them is that these untreated mental health is extremely costly. I mean, if we look at our prison system and how expensive that is, most of that is untreated mental illness.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of a common understanding that's our treatment is prison, and it's way more expensive and degrading
Yeah.
than other ways. So that there's a recognition that, I mean, the shift of our story of what we have to prove is fundamentally shifting from, and although we're not there yet, I don't want to say we're there yet, but we've been all about trying to prove safety and efficacy, and then the shift is to prove economic viability, and persuade insurance companies and national health cares that this is an economic cost that they should bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have with prisons too. I mean, have there been any moves toward helping inmates with this type of therapy?
Well,
in
it's
recent
very
years?
difficult. So the Concord Prison Experiment. Go to, so I learned from doing the follow-up to the Good Friday experiment that these long-term follow-ups are incredibly valuable. And so Timothy Leary had done one other major experiment with Ralph Metzner at Harvard. They were there from 60 to 63 when Leary and Roundas got kicked out. But this was an experiment. They realized that talking about mystical experiences is like, okay, you got a questionnaire and people talk about it, but the real thing is what happens over time.
Right.
But if you look at whether you've got people in prison, whether they go back to prison is an objective outside measure, and it will convince people more than what we say, oh, they had a mystical experience. So it was a brilliant idea that you can do this experiment where they would go into prison, Timothy Leary and Ralph Metzner and others in their team, and they would have psilocybin experiences for the prisoners. And they would sometimes take it with them.
Seems like a terrible place to trip. It's inside of a prison. But I'm sure they set up a nice room.
Well, I think if you're trapped in prison, getting free in your mind.
Oh, actually, yeah, you're right. It would be terrible for me not being in prison.
I have had
but for them,
friends
you're totally right.
In prison, and you think it's an obvious thing that they would catch, but they didn't always do it, is you just put a hit of blotter acid under the stamp, and you mail it to a
Nice. We'll cut
friend.
this part out of the podcast.
Well,
Yeah, not saying you did or didn't do that.
so long. It's this. I think nobody's going to come after
somebody
me
else's trick
for that. No, I'll own it. I'm proud of it. I mean, the next thing, of course, is just to drop liquid acid on the envelope, and you can't even tell. But how do you communicate that is a little bit more of a
Right.
question.
You can't just draw an arrow with a pen. Say lick here, tear this part out. Yeah. You fold the corner so that they know. Actually, that's not bad. You drop a hit of acid on the corner, and then you fold that corner so when they get it, there's only one corner folded. But if the whole thing comes flat, they got to eat the entire envelope, and then worry.
So it is hard to work with prisoners now. I think working with them as they soon get out to try to. All right. So the Concord Prison Experiment gave them experiences inside prison, and then the idea is that they would track them and track for recidivism. And it was considered to be a tremendous success. This is one of the best examples of psychedelic research, really obvious. And And the whole world basically thought that this was a tremendous success. So I had gotten my paper published about the Good Friday experiment, and there was an op-ed in the Boston Globe about it. And then I got a call from someone who worked for the Department of Corrections in Massachusetts, and he'd read this about the Good Friday experiment. And he wanted to know, did I want to do a follow-up, Michael Forcier is his name, to the Concord prison experiment, that he had a list of all the prisoners. Nobody else had a list of the prisoners. He said that the prison system had files for their interesting prisoners. And the prisoners that were in the Concord prison experiment, they had the list of them, and they had this record segregated, and did I want to study them? And I'm like, do I want to study them? This is like a great experiment. I want to bring it to light. I'd love to do it. It was just an incredible opportunity. Took us a whole year to get permission. We had to go all the way up to the governor.
Wow.
The governor's office, the slip that said permission to go to the records had this penciled in thing, no psilocybin to be administered. It's like, we're, okay, just to be clear, we're just asking questions of something that was, 37 years before or so. So we ended up finally getting permission. And the more that I started looking at the records, the more questions I had about the findings. Because it turned out some of these people were going back to jail. And the more I did, the more I got worried. And then finally what I figured out is that the way they counted things, what they said, what Leary had said is that, over time, the more he talked about the results, they just kept getting better and better and better. So if you go back to the original documents, you get one thing, but you get all these other stories over the decades. So that kind of covers it up. And a lot of people don't go back to the original documents. Right. And I hadn't either. I had read all this other stuff. That's why I thought it was such a great experiment. And so what it turned out is that he started saying that people did go back to prison, but they were just parole violations, little things. They were supervised more.
Non-violent. Maybe they wanted to go back because that was the best mushrooms.
They weren't at work. When they were supposed to be at work, they weren't at work or something like that.
Right, something silly, yeah.
Something like that. So it turns out that was right, that a bunch of these people had gone back to jail for parole violations. But what I found later is that it was for crimes that they had committed for which they were later convicted. So even though it was a parole violation, it was because of not some silly thing like they hadn't showed up at work, but because they had actually committed a crime and they had been arrested for it, and then later they were convicted. But the way that he just reported it was this excuse kind of. It was, and the records would show that it was a parole violation that went them initially. That's why they went back.
Right.
But the other thing that he did, and this was where going back to the source documents, is that he talked about how there's like 34 people or so, something like that had the psilocybin, and that they had been out of, they had a recidivism rate that was better than the recidivism rate. They'd done a base rate study of everybody in the prison years before. Well, it turned out that the study itself with the psilocybin, they had an average of 10 months out of jail. So just logically, you think the more you're out of jail, the more time you have to get in trouble, the more likely you are to get busted again. So the odds of more and more people going back to jail, recidivism, goes up the longer it is that they're out of jail.
Sure.
So their study was done at 10 months. And they said that it compared best for this base rate study. All right, so I went back to the base rate study, and the base rate study that they used was for 24 months. So they were comparing people out of been jail 2 years with people that had been out of jail for 10 months.
That's not comparable.
No, but this was back again before the internet. So this was a British Journal of Criminology.
Oh man,
where the base rate study had been. I had to go deep in the libraries at our libraries and get all this thing. And when I finally read it, I was like, how basic. But what was shocking was that how is it that an advocate of psychedelics when there was so much animosity against Leary, that I would be the one to discover that he had not accurately reported things.
Right. Yeah.
How is it that I'm the one that debunks this study?
Because no one was paying attention.
Or they just somehow people didn't go back to this little document.
Yeah. People weren't giving it the
then
attention.
It was just like, obviously I had to share that. But then the thing that was redeeming is that Leary and Metzner realized that after they had gotten these people with this psilocybin experience, they'd had this pro-social spiritual experience, they'd worked through some traumas, they come out, that they needed a support group. It wasn't enough to just help them in prison. You need to help them when they're out of prison to create a new life, to get a job, to get you need to kind of
there needs to be more. There needs to be
more
a support system.
And that they started building that, and that's when they got kicked out of Harvard. All right, so the conclusion is, even though the Good Friday experiment did not really work, it was because there was too much hopes placed in the psychedelic experience, not enough in the integration, not enough into the support group. And if you do both of those things, it could probably make a big difference. And it also should be for prison guards, for police officers. They're all brutalized by the system.
Yeah.
And I think that we will eventually try to work with this is a good point for me to say that the long-term goal is a world of net zero trauma. So we want to have net zero carbon. There's always going to be trauma. There's always going to be heartache. People are always going to die of this and that. There'll always be some conflicts. But we'd like to have net zero trauma, like some stable level, not increasing. What we have now, and what we're going to have probably for the next 20, 30 years is going to be increasing trauma from climate change, from
everything we're going
economic
through.
stuff.
Culture wars.
Right. So what we need is to really develop a metric of the global burden of trauma and then try to see if we can reduce it by 2070. By more or less 50 years.
Are you working on this metric?
Yeah. Well, this is our proposal now is that to think about like a goal. Everybody should have pure water. So that's so charity water. So our goal is a world of net zero trauma. So we have to develop a metric. The Bhutan has a metric for happiness. And they rank other countries on global happiness measures. So if we do this net zero trauma goal, we would do a lot of work in prisons, a lot of work with refugees. There's some predictions are over 1 billion climate refugees by 2050. So there's got to be this massive global therapeutic process, and it cannot be only in the Western model because there's not enough therapists, there's not enough psychiatrists. We're going to have to find indigenous healers, different ways to. So that's where we would learn from, indigenous groups how they want to do that, group settings of some kind. So our thought would be to end up with 25,000, 30,000 psychedelic clinics all over the world. And then over generations or two, you try to really shift humanity in more of this mass mental health and spiritualized humanity direction. And we need to recognize, though, that it will be getting more stressful, I think, over the next couple of decades. But that if we can work together, what are we doing right now? The technology that we're using for people to hear our conversation, it's astounding.
Yeah. So this metric, that sounds like such a heavy task to create a metric.
Yeah.
How do you measure trauma? How do you measure
happiness? You have to think about it. So there's PTSD. So there's estimates of the number of people with PTSD.
Okay.
But there's a lot of that's like when it gets to be really extreme, it becomes PTSD. But there's loads of trauma below that people cope with. So how do you measure all of that? Gender violence. I think you have to be police harassment,
abuse. Yeah.
I think that there is that's, we're measuring pollution. How do we measure? It's another way to say trauma.
Okay.
That it will take population surveys. I mean, it's going to be to do it in every country. Yeah, you have to. How do you know that you can get crime records? How many rapes and murders, or I mean, I was just in Mexico City at the Institute for Psychiatry, and they want to start psychedelic research in Mexico. They're the Mexican government, like equivalent of the National Institute of Mental Health. They haven't had psychedelic research for 50 years in Mexico, but they have enormous amounts of PTSD. They have all the cartel violence and gender violence and just poverty and refugees coming through, migrants, and so I think there's ways to measure it. I mean, so I think one part of what we would do is be having this team that's the measurers. Then hopefully the way bigger team is the therapists.
Yeah,
we're trying to tip the scales.
Yeah, you're gonna have to come up with a name for that too. A name for the unit of trauma. How much? Like how many SADs per country? We can't go over 5 million SADs per year, and then we can create an acronym with SAD. Just SAD. Sorry, sodden and desperate. Could be the acronym.
Substance abuse, depression.
Yeah. How do we bring these SADs down to a net zero? That's incredible, man.
That's but I think you're right. There will be some acronym.
There's
some
got to
unit.
be some, because pollution is like some amount and everything else.
Parts per billion.
Right, exactly. How many SADs per billion do we have? How many cries per trillion?
How many laughs per day?
How many laughs per day? I need at least 100. Otherwise, I start to weigh down on the trauma scale. Rick, there's so much that we could talk about.
There is one more thing I'd like to talk about.
Please, and then I have rapid fire questions to end it.
So this is that it does seem like there's hundreds of for-profit psychedelic companies. I just read today over $3 billion has been put into psychedelics.
$3 billion.
$3 billion. There's all sorts of, there's 5 times more research now than in the 60s.
Wow.
With psychedelics. And we've just finished our second phase 3 study, and if we do get approval, it's in early 2024. It's like the doorway to a new world. So we are having the world's largest conference on psychedelics ever coming up in June of 2023 in Denver. And Colorado has just passed the Natural Medicines Act. Mm-hmm. So we're expecting around 10,000 people. We have the Denver Convention Center. We have all these hotel rooms. And we have just an enormous amount of scientific information that's being generated, of business opportunities that are developing, of art, of music, just of the first 2 days of the conference are going to be experiential. So meaning all these different ways, holotropic breathwork, hyperventilation. Yeah. So Stan Groff and Brigitte will be coming to help coordinate that. Naropa, which is a school nearby, is going to lead a meditation retreat.
Awesome.
We're going to have ceremonies with rapé, which is a nicotine-based, but you can ceremonialize. It takes.
Is that the nasal inhale?
Yeah, like a nicotine kind of.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll have stoned yoga and various experiential kinds. I'd like to organize ayahuasca ceremonies from the Santo Daime tradition, which is federally legal. And so we'd like a couple days of experiential and then 3 days of the conference and then 1 day of sort of picnic.
Awesome. Yeah, 1 day of recovery. Right. That last day is your therapy day. Everybody talks about their feelings on the last day. That's amazing. Is this this doesn't sound 10,000 people can't be invitation only then?
Oh, no, it's not. No.
That's
This is, we're wanting, we're still, we haven't finalized it yet, but we're in negotiations for a big set of dorm rooms right near the convention center. So there'll be low-cost housing, hopefully, for students. Wow. But we have loads of hotels. We did negotiate the prices a couple of years ago. Now there is a bit of inflation, so they're good deals.
Are tickets out already?
Yes, we've already sold over 1,000 tickets.
Wow. Where can people buy tickets?
Psychedelicscience.org.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Count me in for 2.
Yes.
I might just pop up a comedy tent off to the side.
Well, we're going to have, there's a 5,000 seat theater there.
Oh yeah.
There's going to be comedy stuff. There's going to be.
Okay, we'll talk.
Yeah, and part of it is going to be coming out,
Mm-hmm.
this idea of people telling their stories.
Yeah.
There'll be, I think, kind of a real sense of the next step of integration of mainstreaming. The mayor is going to open up the conference.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow, you should invite every former DARE officer to this conference. Every single one. I remember Officer Reynolds in my high school telling us about smoking weed and taking our parents' pills, and I mean, obviously that's bad, but just don't do these things. They're all bad. So it's just wild to see.
It's just amazing.
Person.
It's amazing that you're saying this, though, because I just was at a conference in Miami called Wonderland, put on by this group Microdose, about a lot of psychedelic investors. And they had to hire a certain number of police in order to, for the crowds, the city requirement. And one of them came up to the organizer, Patrick, and said that he was an undercover narcotics officer, but that he was learning an incredible amount of all these stories. and he said, could he bring a bunch of his police friends over?
Man.
He said, it's not going to be any trouble. They just would like to see.
Imagine what that's like.
And by the end, there was a bunch of police officers there that were listening.
Were they uniformed? Were they?
Some of them were.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
I can't imagine what that's like, being a police officer or somebody in that line of work. Yeah. Seeing this happen and just realizing that such a significant part of what you were told to be true about your job is now just being crushed in front of you.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
It's hard to realize that you've been engaged in a counterproductive situation.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I know you got to go. I appreciate your time.
Wow.
Let me hit you with a couple of fun questions.
Oh, okay.
All right.
And then I'll have one or two for you.
Oh, please. Okay, cool. All right. Question number one. What's like, and this might be a crazy one, but we're going to start a little wild. I want to know, every time I do psychedelics with a friend or on my own, if I'm doing a journey dose to overcome whatever issue, or just to allow an intention to come to me. Sometimes I don't always bring intention into the moment. Yeah. I always find that there's some type of metaphor that pops up. Your mind, you get taught certain metaphors, like, oh my God, the microwave, I left it open. Maybe that means I need to open my heart up a little more. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what one of the most kind of inspirational moments was to you. Like what that metaphor was.
Yes.
And if maybe it made you chuckle a little bit a day or two later. And if you have more than
this
one,
is a
it's
great
totally
question.
fine.
Okay, and I think I have a really good answer. So we're here at a Vets Gala, and it's for a lot of people, vets, Navy SEALs and others with trauma that have gone down to Mexico for Ibogaine and often 5-MeO DMT. Mm-hmm. So the experience is my Ibogaine experience. And the metaphor, it was one of the hardest experiences I've ever had. It was actually before these DEA lawsuits, and part of it that I was being given an LSD experience by Leo Zeff, the secret chief, the leader of the underground psychedelic therapy movement, and this was plant Ibogaine. Takes a while, so he gave me 350 micrograms of LSD and a bunch of Ibogaine to work on my own shadow, so I would be a little bit better able to deal with the police without demonizing them. So the metaphor, I spent about 10 hours vomiting, and I felt like it's so important that I get this right. It's so important that I understand the psychedelics and understand this, that I have to get this right, and that that it's just this dissolution, this, you hear about ego death and all this kind of phraseology. And I just have this sense that I can't quite do it right. I'm not quite doing it right or something, that if I were to be fully aware of death, I would be fully aware of life, and I would be able to do what I need to do, but it just was too scary, or wasn't doing quite right. And so this idea of this self-critical part, and I would see that. And then I would see the link between the self-critical part and the self-hatred part. And then the self-hatred part, I would just see that. And I would just like this perfectionism. Why do I have to be perfect? It's like the desire not to be human, because humans are not perfect. And, I think eating disorders can be like this too. But it was just this idea that I was being, I was crucified on the cross of self-perfectionism.
Wow.
That's the image that I had.
Whoa.
That I was being crucified on the cross of self-perfectionism. And I couldn't get out of it.
Was that a phrase that came to you
during
in
the experience?
Moment?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
This was on psilocybin, you said?
No,
or
this was
LSD?
Ibogaine. This was the LSD Ibogaine
LSD
combination.
Ibogaine. Yeah.
And that by the end, I just kept this cycle. I would see it, and I would be choking and coughing and feeling like I was dying. Like I was aware of death, but I was somehow not doing it right. And at the end of the day, after all this agony, somehow I called this part transcendence by exhaustion. I didn't resolve it. I didn't work my way through it. Somehow I just got so exhausted that I just let go. And it was the most blissful, beautiful night. And I realized the key point was that I needed to, the self-critical part is absolutely essential. You need this constant self-critical part. But you need to separate it out from the self-hatred. And you don't need to be perfect. So that this is the drive for quality, the self-critical part. So that once I could separate out this from this painful, then it's just, okay, I should have done that. I should have done this. But really, if I hadn't have done this first thing, I wouldn't have learned this lesson anyway. So I'm great for having tried something new.
Yeah.
But I think ever since then, I've had a greater access to this self-critical part because it has been less painful. The same way you could say about greater access to memories of trauma because it's not as painful. You've integrated it.
Yeah.
And it was this night, this most blissful night of I could see the stars through the skylights, and it was just like absolute acceptance and peace. And this is where I'm sorting out. I need to really make an ally out of the self-critical part. But somehow I told myself I didn't earn it. And by the morning, when the sun came up and the tides came in, we were on the water, I was like, I'll be back in this nausea part. And that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And so the whole next day I couldn't move. I was stuck on the floor. I was like in a fetal position. And finally the third day somebody came and picked me up. And as we went home, and I'd never been to this place before, I just had this idea that I could somehow or other predict what was around the corner and things. And I'd been there coming here, and I was able to be right a bunch of times. So I think I had the information in there, but the chat and the inner chatter. So I quieted that out a little bit.
The chatter was cloudying your
memory of things,
right?
And I quieted it down a little bit, and it took 4 days before I felt safe enough to drive.
Wow. Oh my God.
But I think of that was 1985 as one of the key psychedelic experiences, and that it was. It was an important learning, and it's affected me, I think, every day. And it was ironic for me to be Jewish to have the image, the metaphor to be crucified on the cross of self-perfectionism, a very Jesus kind of metaphor.
It's a beautiful phrasing that just came to you. I mean, that alone, you wrote a poem in the moment. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. Okay, next. You're dropped on a desert island. You have all the food and water that you need. You're only allowed to bring one psychedelic drug. And you're there forever. What are you bringing and why?
LSD.
Okay.
LSD.
Yeah.
Why is that MDMA is beautiful. It's wonderful. If I didn't have somebody, I was there by myself, so I wasn't in a relationship with anybody. Wouldn't need it for that purpose.
Right.
So the thing is about LSD is that you need to, it can help you see things you don't want to see, or it's about surrender. there's a little bit of negotiation with MDMA. MDMA is sweeter, gentler, more beautiful.
Heart-based, yeah.
Heart-based. But there's also exquisite moments with LSD. But there's a way in which it's a little bit more open to what you might not want to see. And so I think it would be better for me if I did just one thing. It would be LSD.
Do you think LSD? I hesitate to say anything too general because I know these medicines and their experiences can be so subjective based on the person and the type of trauma or challenge that they're trying to work through. But do you find that of all psychedelics that there's one or two that might stand out as the most helpful overall, or do they each kind of fall within a different category of challenge or trauma, depending on what the drug is?
I think that, the research into who gets better from therapy, into therapeutic outcomes, has showed that the critical factor is not the kind of therapy, but it's the therapeutic alliance between the person and the therapist. In the safe, trusting environment. And so the form of the therapy is of secondary importance to feeling like you can go to difficult places. So what I think is that the classic psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, ayahuasca, even DMT, and that they operate kind of in this rainbow, but they're sort of in the same general place.
Yeah.
And so that we can talk about MDMA for PTSD. Bunches of people here have gone down to Mexico for Ibogaine for PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, and 5-MeO. That people go for ketamine for PTSD, go to psilocybin for PTSD. Which is the best for which condition is different for each person too, and what their background is. So I think this field of psychedelic medicine is what we're trying to bring forward, and have therapists be able to be cross-trained in all these modalities and then customize what they give to each person. And that's the psychedelic therapy.
And they would customize what they give to each person based on that person's trauma or challenge that they're working through. Like, do you see something like PTSD as requiring a different form of psychedelic therapy and drug than?
Okay, this is another good point. Is that the research with the classic psychedelics, which do tend to produce more of this mystical experience, has shown that there's a correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcomes, reduction of depression or OCD or substance use, and that was true in the 60s, and it's true the last 20 years for the classic psychedelics. However, with MDMA, for PTSD, there is no correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. So it's a different kind of mechanism in that you're dealing with your biography, things that have happened to you. You have kind of an intact ego. There is what's called the epigenetics of trauma, which is multi-generational trauma, which is kind of what turns genes on and off for anxiety, for depression. And there's Rachel Youth has done a study with Holocaust survivors and their children and have shown epigenetic measures. We're actually studying that.
Wow!
Now
they'll pass along the genes for stress, anxiety, and trauma.
No. It's what turns on the genes. So
what
the
turns
genes
on
are
the genes. Got it.
All right. Well, yeah. So there's things on EPA is on top of. So it's on top of the genes. It's kind of turns them on and off, and that can evolve in a lifetime. That can change in a day, in certain kind of things, or over a lifetime. But the genes are much slower. But the effect on you and your behavior and your moods can be dramatically changed in a relatively short amount of time. And we can probably end or minimize certain of these cycles of trauma that go down from generation. You hear about hurt people, and how do you stop that from happening? So that's where I think we can get to a world of net zero trauma.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be a big task, but but it can be done.
Cool. I know we can. We can get these sad parts per billions down. Okay, next.
These are quick questions but long answers. So.
I love it. Yeah. So, okay, I don't want to get too political here, but
yeah.
I am of a very strong belief that anybody running for president should do a very heavy dose of mushrooms during their political campaign at some point, particularly before the debate happens. If you were to write a new regulation into American politics stating that anyone running for president needs to undergo psychedelic therapy, what do you think would be best
I think that's
for our potential candidates?
Well, we're saying, first off, for the therapists that we are training, that they'll be more effective if they've done MDMA themselves to give MDMA to patients, but we will never require it. We highly recommend it. So I'm already a little nervous about your hypothetical of requiring people to do things.
We'll say strongly advise.
Okay.
We strongly advise
highly
presidential
recommend it.
candidates.
Yeah. I would advise MDMA. And I'm trying to think if I would advise MDMA with a couples therapy or with them individually. I think, if you gave MDMA to Trump, would he become empathic? Probably not. So I think you have to be willing. You have to be open to it. You have to feel safe. So
we could put him in a gold mansion.
There are. I think so. There's two sort of general theories again about what we'd want politicians to have. There is a ayahuasca church not far from Washington D.C. that's federally legal. So there is efforts to bring politicians to ayahuasca and their staff. And that's been happening. There's there's Israelis and Palestinians doing ayahuasca and MDMA together as well. If people want to read the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, there's an article about how this woman, Carol Rosin, and I, in the middle 80s, sent large amounts of MDMA into Russia with their military people and arms negotiators during the Reagan-Gorbachev negotiations. So I think that one idea is to see their common humanity. The other is to clear up your fears and anxieties about the others. And I think, ideally you do both. But I would say that I would start with MDMA. I would encourage them to have MDMA to kind of self-love, self-connection, work that. But I will say something very interesting about the influence of the spiritual experience in a way. So during the Reagan and Gorbachev arms control negotiations, which were the most important things happening in the world at the time, more than business, it's just incredible. The thing that was amazing was that the dates were set by Nancy Reagan's astrologer. So you can check this out, and it's very documented that Ronald Reagan, these kind of Ronald and Nancy Reagan, that she believed in astrology.
She was really?
Not only did she believe in astrology, but her astrologer set the dates for the Reagan-Gorbachev arms control negotiations.
Wow.
And they were almost always on the full moon. So they had these late-night negotiations that would go on, and it would be under the full moon. And they would kind of realize we're trying to not blow the whole world up. We're trying to, it would be a little bit more of a cosmic kind of thing.
Wow.
That would be a background.
Yeah.
To they still have to work on the negotiations.
Sure, but they would have this slightly elevated pattern of thought.
Yes. And because they always talked about negotiating late into the night under the full moon. Mm-hmm. And so I think the spiritual experiences kind of would be like that. Also the MDMA experience, to feel this love and connection and work through some of your own issues. So what you're saying is we need to schedule presidential debates to be on the full moon. I think that when I my wife and I decided to get married, and we created our own ceremony, we got married under the full moon.
Awesome. Yeah, then that would
Yeah.
help. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
Trump doing an ounce of Molly, and we give Biden a whole bunch of LSD, and Trump's heart expands, and Biden's brain grows, and everybody just starts getting along more. That would be my wish.
Well, let it
Be
be
my
so,
wish,
you
you know?
know, as they say.
Do you
But actually, I do think that the strategy, to be serious, is that the mental health has to reside in the mass of the people. It has to be spiritualized humanity, mass mental health, because the people that we have are the representatives. If they can play on fears and anxieties, they will. But the power is given from the people to these people, and there will always be sociopaths and people that are willing to take advantage of that. So that's just to say that it is a great vision to take a few leaders and help them be better.
I would love it.
But I think we need to
But we
do
need
that
to
on
do
a
that.
billion scale.
For sure. Yeah, we
Yeah.
need to set the foundation for that to happen.
Yeah.
So that once we set the foundation, the next leaders that arise will be arising from this pot of people who have reached this next level of lower trauma and more enlightenment and more of a spiritual connection
So there's
to themselves and others.
Yeah. So to continue this biblical theme, there's an issue about why I think it'll be a couple generations, 2070, for us to have this spiritualized humanity. And so one of the leaps of logic I'll make here is that when the Passover is when the Israelis left slavery under Pharaoh, and they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, in the Sinai desert, before they crossed into the Promised Land. Well, the Sinai desert is not that big. Why did it take them 40 years? I mean, actually, I have an Israeli cousin who was in the Israeli army, and they said part of the things that they did is they would dump them in the Sinai desert and they'd have to figure out how to get out. By different kind of locating things without a lot of tools and stuff. And he said he could understand how people could get lost there for a long time. But the idea, I think, is that the idea was that people born into freedom would be the ones to start the Promised Land. That the people who were born into slavery, you absorb stuff like that. You just think of yourself differently. They had to die out. The next generation, the people who were born into freedom. So I think the people who are born into this more net zero trauma world will be
the people to rise and
to really do great work.
Yeah.
But the greater work, you could even say, is getting us from this morass of trauma, on that trajectory.
Yeah. You're getting us there.
But I don't even know. I shouldn't say it like that. There'll always be great challenges at every age.
Sure.
And this just happens to be ours. And I think it is really delicate. I mean, the Colorado initiative was like 51 to 49.
Yeah. It was not a blowout.
Not at all.
It was too close, like scarily close.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be maybe that's my own naivety, but I thought it was going to be way outnumbered in favor.
Yeah.
So lots of work to do, though. Do you know, I think a big part of that work, though, too, is reducing the stigma, the societal stigma.
Yes,
I mean, it's massive. That's
well, that's the coming out. That's this idea also of the psychedelic science.
Tell your parents have you talked to your parents about drugs? Yeah.
And I like to also encourage people to think about becoming a member of MAPS. We've been concentrating so much on the major donor strategy, but we have an incredibly good bulletin, and we have a lot of things for members. So we'd really like to build our base too, for people that just donate like $50 or something a year or whatever. Yeah, we'd like to really, because then they become connected to all the information flows more easily, and
they can see
come
what's
to the
going on.
conference.
Reducing the stigma too, I think, comes with just injecting more positivity around the subject matter into culture. That's why I'm talking to everybody about how Santa is a mushroom. Do you know about
I
Santa being a mushroom?
The Amanita muscaria.
Yeah.
And the reindeer.
And how the shamans in Finland and Siberia would pick the Amanita mushroom under a pine tree.
Yeah.
Pine trees are what we bring inside for Christmas trees, right? Do you know about all the different things? It's so cool. Yeah.
Well, I think this book I'll recommend Brian Muir Rescue. The book is The Immortality Key.
Yeah.
So it's really about how the early wine of Christianity was spiked. And that this transition from pagans to Christianity, there was this 300-400 year period before the Catholic Church wiped it out, and where the formation of this religion was infused by psychedelic experiences, and they're finding more and more evidence about that, and with this incredible technique of taking old chalices from thousands of years ago.
Yeah, they can find physical evidence, right?
They can do
inside of the
things that were there, leave a tiny
residue that you can scrape off and look at and pick apart underneath a microscope or
there are people that specialize in that stuff, scale. And they are finding all sorts of psychoactive things. So
in what was once
wine. So Santa is a mushroom, but Jesus
is wait, what does that make Jesus?
Jesus got high.
Jesus got high. Yeah, Santa's a mushroom, and Jesus is a peyote plant. Yeah, that's wild.
No, I think Jesus was a person.
Yeah,
I think. But okay, so here's something that my wife shared with me, just as a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do we rethink what really happened back then? So the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. So my wife Lynn worked for the World Council of Churches and did third world development all over the world, and with mostly women projects, but these are more like the liberal Protestant version of the Vatican and stuff. So these were people who are not fundamentalists. So they reinterpreted this miracle of the loaves and the fishes. So the miracle is Jesus, gives a Sermon on the Mount, and it's really beautiful, and then it's like there's not enough food, and here he's got a few loaves and a few fishes, and he miraculously makes enough for everybody, and that means Jesus is God, and he's can do all these miracles. He can walk on water. He can do all this stuff. So the one way to look at it is what actually happened is he was just a guy, and he gave an incredible sermon about sharing and how we're all together, and everybody just shared, and that's the real miracle. Yeah, and that it's also it's what each of us should be doing. We're all called to action.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a miracle, I can't multiply all those loaves and fishes.
Right.
But I could maybe be a little bit less selfish. Yeah.
The miracle is getting people to share and get along.
Yeah. And then you get hierarchies in churches, and that simple thing gets lost, and now it turns into this magic story.
Yeah. That's incredible. Rick, thank you so much, brother. I appreciate you. Did you have anything for me?
Well, I did. I mean, we've talked for a long time. I mean, are you going to edit this?
I'm so sorry.
No. This is great. It's been super fun, and I think
cool.
It really speaks to the value sometimes of getting high before you do a podcast. Not always.
It really does.
But
I mean, I wasn't planning on it, but I think added to the flow. That's for sure. I don't really like editing much, so we'll see.
I hope you. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like I said anything that I shouldn't have said.
No, I think you're great.
I mean, a lot of times you don't know that.
You won't get in trouble for it. I will. So, no, I'm going to keep everything in, and then we're going to go do a whole bottle of acid right now together, and it's going to be a wonderful time.
That would be overdoing it a bit.
That would be overdoing it.
That would be
bit,
wasteful.
Yeah.
We should give it to the politicians, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. We could dose the
with
White House
MDMA, but I think that would be too much. So I do think the MDMA LSD combination is good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, brother, for giving us your time, giving the world your love. Appreciate you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Stoked to hang. We could do it again another time because there's going to be way more to come.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at the conference even. We could do something.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
See you, everybody. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Check out Rick Doblin's TED Talk online. You can just type that into YouTube. It'll pop right up. And check out all the work that MAPS does and support them any way you can. MAPS.org is the website. Check back for new episodes here every week. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check us out on Instagram at Good Trip Podcast. Or you can check me out on Instagram at Brent Pella. I repost clips there all the time. And have a wonderful week, everybody. Love you so much. Peace.